Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Colleen Hitchcock. I am a member of the Board of Directors for the Swampscott Conservancy, and I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us this evening for our fall education event all about bats. I will wait for the official title in just a moment. To give you just a little bit of an overview of who the Swampscott Conservancy is, if you have not participated in one of our events before, we are a local nonprofit here in Swampscott, Massachusetts, that is dedicated to helping to support the open space and conservation areas within town. And we take a four-pronged approach to doing this through education events such as this one. We work on habitat improvement projects from the pollinator garden down at Town Hall to small habitat restoration projects through town to increasing our newly established trail connector with Salem. We also do citizen science through both documenting the king tides and high tides, like the ones we had this weekend, as well as working with iNaturalists, and community building events when the conditions allow to get us out and connect together. And you can see some of us birding there together last winter. Please continue to join us here at the Conservancy, so you can become a member, you can join our monthly meetings, you can continue to participate in our speaker series, our citizen science events, and our volunteer opportunities. So just reach out to connect with us, and we are happy to engage with you and to support you as you support us in helping to improve the open spaces here in Swampscott. So you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can also reach out to us via email at the swampscottconservancy@gmail. With that, I'm actually going to stop sharing so that our speaker can get himself oriented here. And whoops. With that, I will also take a minute to introduce our speaker for this evening. Charlie, yeah, you're good. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Charlie Chester. Charlie is a leader in global environmental politics and is a faculty member at Brandeis University, as well as at the Fletcher School of Tufts University. Two of his Brandeis courses focus on climate change, atmospheric civics and diplomacy, and climate change causes, impacts, responses, and solutions. He has co-edited the volume of Conservation and Climate Change, Landscape and Seascape Science, Planning and Action, which was an Island Press publication in 2012. And what we're going to be highlighting tonight is his role with Bat Conservation International, where he serves on the board, and he is also chair of the Yellowstone to Yukon Council. Both of these conservation organizations are conservation organizations that grapple with the threat of climate change. He also has a really awesome website, which I will drop into the chat as soon as I am done talking, that is an online guide to global environmental politics. And it contains an extensive guide to climate-related information on the web. At present, one of his projects also includes researching a book on the interwoven histories of African conservation in protected areas, American scientists and taxidermy, European royalty and colonial legacies, and climate change. Wow, that really is a mouthful, Charlie. But it is my pleasure to now turn things over here to Charlie Chester, who is going to be talking to us about bat curiosities and conservation concerns. And I also just want to acknowledge the in-kind support from the Brandeis University Environmental Studies program for hosting our Zoom this evening. With that, I hand it over to you, Charlie, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Colleen, and thank you everyone for showing up. I really appreciate it. We're all so zoomed out these days, and the fact that you are here it really means a lot, and I really appreciate it. One thing is I do want to make sure that everyone gets to ask questions, and one thing I've really learned about Zoom is that it's when I'm speaking and looking at my screen, it's kind of hard to see something come up. So, so I'm going to go through this as I can. Please keep don't lose your questions, because I'm sure a lot of questions will come up. So jot them down, write them down on your computer screen, and just make sure you keep them, because I really want to get your questions. But if someone has just a burning question, don't hesitate to speak out. So let's get started. I do have a lot I want to cover tonight because I love bats, and every time I get to talk about bats, I have to make a lot of difficult decisions of what to keep in and what to keep out, because there is so much to talk about bats. But let me start. This is, okay, let me go make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, so this is a bunch of Mexican free-tailed bats. This picture's taken in Texas. And I want to start out with something that's sort of a bit of an aside, but it's a very famous paper that was published in the early 1970s in sort of a crossover field between philosophy and psychology. And some of you probably will have either know this article or have heard of it. It's a very famous article called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" This is published in the Philosophical Review, and essentially the author, a very well-known philosopher, so someone kind of unknown to me, but his name was Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel was trying to argue that consciousness cannot be explained or understood through reductionism. And so this is one of the most controversial or talked about papers. And we're not going to cover any of that. It's kind of a fluke that he started with bats. But he did start with bats. One of my favorite internet memes is, what is it like to be a Nagel? But we're going to start with a different question. What is it like to be a bat? But what is it like not to be a bat? There's a lot of ways to interpret that question, but it's my roundabout way of getting to the unfortunate fact that not being a bat is becoming a more and more common phenomenon. There are less and less bats out there. And because you are all related to the Swampscott Conservancy and are interested in natural history, you've probably heard of something called white nose syndrome. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later. But white nose syndrome isn't the only threat facing bats. So I'm going to focus on that quite a bit. But before I get to that sort of conservation aspects of bats, I want to give some basic bat biology. The kind of stuff that as someone who studies policy is not my specialty, but I'm very interested in it. This is really the part that Colleen should be giving, but I'll do it. I want to start by saying two things. We know a lot. We don't know a lot about bats. And we do know a lot about bats. So this is really my opportunity to give you my favorite quote, which comes from F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." We don't know a lot about bats because they fly at night and they're hard to track and they're hard to follow and they're obscure and they're small. And so it's very hard to follow them. It's very, just biologically speaking. We actually ended up knowing a lot about them for a number of reasons. One is that they use something called echolocation. They blurt out sounds, the sound bounces off something, comes back, and it was one of the bases for the creation of radar. And so echolocation is something that the US military was very interested in. And since about the late 1940s, but really starting in in a very big way in the 1950s, the United States military pumped money into biological research on bats. So we think of bats as sort of flying at night and hard to follow. Hello? I think, yeah. Anyways, we think of bats as hard to follow, hard to see, but we know a lot about them because we wanted to know something very specific about them. And the US military actually understood that if we're going to understand their echolocation, we actually have to understand their basic biology, sort of what underlies their ability to do this echolocation. So biology, if you were a budding PhD biologist in the 1950s, there was a good chance that you'd go into bats, that you'd study bats. Why? Because there was funding for it. There was funding for your research. So there are a lot of people out, there's a very large bat biology community out there. Every year there's something called the North American Society for Bat Research. They get together and there can be from 4,000 to 6,000 people there. So that's an indicator of just how much we actually do know about bats. So here's just a little bit of the biological placement of where bats stand in the biological world. Bats constitute one of 21 mammalian orders, so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And here, if you notice in parentheses after each of these orders is the number of species in that order. Chiroptera is the order name for, is the Latin order name for bats. And unfortunately, to the bat biologist's chagrin, bats don't win. The winners are the rodents. There are over 2,000 species of rodents on the planet. Chiroptera comes in a nice close second. There are approximately, actually this number is now larger, but the official number, the latest official number that I inserted into this presentation is 1,419 species of bats. So that's a lot of species, almost a fifth of all mammal species on the planet. So there are two, all of you are familiar with the classic taxonomic ranking of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Taxonomists or systematics, what do you call them, Colleen? Systematics experts, systematics? I don't know the.
Systematists.
Thank you. All the people who think about where and how you name species and where you put them and how you classify them, not only have orders and families, they have suborders and superorders and superfamilies. So there are two chiropteran suborders, and they are the Microchiroptera and the Megachiroptera, essentially small bats and large bats. Here's just a few random pictures of the small bats. The world's smallest bat, and perhaps the world's smallest mammal, is Kitty's hognose bat, which is the one in the upper left here. This bat is actually in a contest with, it looks like I did not write it down. There's a mole, I believe it's a mole, and Kitty's hognose bat is in a contest with this mole as to which is the world's smallest mammal. And they duke it out, and the mole biologist and the bat biologist both have different opinions on this. But this is, so these are, the Microchiroptera exist worldwide. You can find them on all continents except Antarctica. And you can only find Microchiroptera in the Western Hemisphere. In the Western Hemisphere, there is no such thing. There are no extant species of Megachiroptera, which are commonly called flying foxes. So these are the more charismatic bat species. And in fact, only one or two of these species in the Megachiroptera actually echolocate. Most of them don't echolocate. They're mostly frugivores. They eat fruit. That is their main food source. So just a little bit more on the biology, and then I promise we'll move on. But I'm doing this because I have Colleen's watching me, so I get nervous because I know she wants the biology, and if I don't do the biology, she'll get on my case. So there are 19 families of bats, 18 of which are in the Microchiroptera, and one of which is in the Megachiroptera. So most of the bat diversity is within the Microchiroptera, around Swampscott, around New England, pretty much around the United States and Canada, or southern Canada, and including Alaska, and kind of a little bit into northern Mexico. The family that we're seeing, whether it's little brown bats or big brown bats or hoary bats, they are all part of this second to last bottom family called the Vespers. That's what the biologists say, the Vespers, the Vespertilionidae. So that's most of the species that you see around here are going to be in that family. And I'm just going to rush through. I'm going to show you some of the diversity of both Microchiroptera and Megachiroptera. Start with the most spectacular. This is the spotted bat. This is a North American species, and you can see, I don't have a picture of its back, but it's beautiful black and white patterns on its back with beautiful big ears. This is Chapin's free-tailed bat. Here we have Tome's sword-nosed bat. Here is the long-tongued bat of Mexico. Here's the greater bulldog bat. I'll show you another picture of this bat later. This is a fishing bat. Its fur is this beautiful orange, and it actually has evolved to eat fish, and I'll show you a picture of that. Here's the Honduran, Central American countries sort of battle over the name of this bat. Mostly speaking, it's the Honduran white bat, but I've also heard it called the Costa Rican white bat. I've also heard it called the Panama white bat. But this is generally called the Honduran. And what you're seeing is it's in its roost. And if you've ever been to Costa Rica or you've ever been to Central America and you've been hiking through a rainforest, you have very likely walked right by this bat. This is a tent making bat. So it takes a palm leaf. So think of a palm giant, you're walking through the rainforest and here's this leaf that I'm pretending my hands is a leaf. And the bats go underneath and they perforate along the stem, along the middle part. They don't cut it off, but they make it so that it drops and it creates a tent. So the camera right now is looking straight up into the tent that these bats have made. And they're everywhere. They're not a rare species. You see these bats in lots of places. Here's a very special bat that has evolved to have its eyeball within its ear. It's called the ghost-faced bat. This is actually a bat I've gotten to see. These are not my pictures, generally speaking. This picture is my picture, and so is the next picture, because the next picture is my favorite bat of all. It exemplifies the unimaginative force of taxonomists, because they named this bat the wrinkle-faced bat. And I just love this guy. He's a face only a mother could love, but boy, mom is just in love. What a beautiful boy or girl. I'm not sure. And then here is a bat called the false vampire bat. And that brings up a question. There's over 1,400 species of bats. Well, the bat that I'm most familiar with is the vampire bat, the blood-sucking bat. Where does that come in? Is this a blood-sucking bat? No, this is not a blood-sucking bat. This is a insectivorous bat. It's called the false vampire bat, but there are indeed vampire bats. So out of the 1,400 species of bats, 3 of them drink blood. 2 of those 3 only drink the blood of birds. 1 of them drinks the blood of mammals, and that is Desmodus rotundus, the common vampire bat, this cute guy here. This species is rightly feared by primarily ranchers in in Latin America, so starting right around the U.S.-Mexico border and going south all the way down to Brazil, and I think this species is even in a little bit of Argentina. I'm not sure about that, but definitely into Brazil. Desmodus rotundus is it drinks the blood of mammals. This bat is amazing. It does cause ranchers problems, and it can spread disease. There are effective ways of controlling it, and the organization that I'm involved with has been doing a lot of work on trying to get ranchers to deal with the problems presented by this bat. But looking at this bat just from a biological perspective, it is an amazing creature. It has an organ right, can you see my mouse? You see? So it's got an organ right between its nose and its eyeball that's akin to an infrared detector. Some nutty biologists are kind of nutty. Colleen accepted, I have to say that. They're biologists who like to stick their toes out of their tent and see what happens when a vampire bat comes and takes a sip from their big toe. And what people say, and what is evident from when a vampire bat starts licking blood from a cow, is that you can't feel it. It was presumed, because you couldn't feel it, that the reason you couldn't feel it was because there must be some kind of painkiller in the saliva of the bat, because the bat comes up and kind of licks as it goes along. So it was assumed. Turns out there is no saliva, there's no painkiller. It's just really good at what it does. It can, through its little infrared detector, it can find where the blood is closest to the surface of the skin. And then it comes up, so the next thing it does is it doesn't fly and swoop down on you. It's actually it's the best walker in the bat world. It can actually walk quite well. And I think I have a picture. So here's a picture of it walking. Here's a picture of one drinking the blood, drinking from a toe of a chicken. And here's a Desmodus rotundus that has walked up to some kind of livestock. I believe this is a cow, but I'm not positive, and is taking a sip. It doesn't swoop down. It walks up and it starts drinking. It turns out that there's no painkiller, but there is an anticoagulant, a blood thinner in its saliva that's actually now being used as in pharmaceuticals under a terrible name, Draculin, as an actual blood thinner. That was discovered, and it's pretty remarkable what these bats do. The problems that they've caught, one of the big issue with these vampire bats, with these common vampire bats, it's assumed that they were very rare pre-European entry into the New World. But then when the Spaniards and then the English and everyone else came in and brought in cattle and pigs and lots of livestock, that enabled Desmodus rotundus populations to explode. And so this very once not rare but not a common species became a common species because its food source exploded across the two continents of the New World. All right, so that's enough on Desmodus rotundus, on the common vampire bat. I guess one other thing I'll say is that this is where science paves the way for solutions. If you are a rancher in Latin America and you have not been taught that there are many species of bats, every bat looks like a vampire bat. And so ranchers were going out and killing all the bats that they could find, including the bats that were important for their farms, that were doing things like pollinating their plants and important things like that. And it was discovered that the vampire bat is very, very social, and they groom each other. So the best way to deal with vampire bats is you catch them, you paint a toxic chemical on their back, and it sounds a little brutal, but you send that vampire back, you let that vampire back off after capturing it and painting its back with toxins, and they go back, and the whole family, the small colony is dealt with effectively. So, all right, well, so a few more just shots. We'll move over to the Megachiroptera. This is Lyell's flying fox. This is from, again, the Eastern Hemisphere. This is the spectacle. I love this bat, the spectacled flying fox. And here's the Gambian epauletted fruit bat. So you can see there's not quite there's a lot of diversity, but essentially not as much diversity within the Megachiroptera as there is within the Microchiroptera. And even a non-biologist can see that. All right, so here's a question for you. What has a bat done for you lately? Well, I would say the best answer to that, there's no right answer, but the best answer to that is eat. A bat has eaten for you lately. Bats eat everything. Now, I've talked about the fact that 3 out of 1,400 species eat blood. They eat a lot of different things. Here's a very famous picture from National Geographic of Trichopterosis swooping down to eat a frog. This was on the when you opened up the 100 years of National Geographic. This is on the flyleaf, the first shot that you see when you open up the book. This is such a spectacular shot. Here's that fishing bat I promised I'd show. And the fishing bat's echolocation is so precise, it can detect a fish at the top of the water. It can detect the bump that a fish is making at the top of the water, and it comes down and it swoops down, and you can see the fish that it's caught there. Unfortunately, this picture doesn't show the orange of the bat, but that is an orange bat. This is all well and interesting, but what's really key for humans is what bats do in terms of eating insects. Here is a cave in Texas. It's called Bracken Cave. In the middle of summer, approximately 15 million bats can be in this one cave. So think of that, 15 million bats. That's an estimation. We used to say 20 million, but we downgraded that to 15 million because that's our best estimate right now. And these bats come out at night and they fly about 60 miles out, and they eat very harmful crop pests in southwestern Texas that amounts to an ecosystem service that is measured in the tens of millions of dollars. Now I know that Zoom sometimes does not get video very well, so I'm sorry about that, but I hope I'm going to just show you what happens as these bats are flying out. Can you see that okay? You'll hear some voices in the background because this is just a picture I took. And you can see the bats are flying in kind of what looks like a tube off into the distance. They're doing that because my camera wasn't good enough. This was shot with an iPhone, but there are hawks around, and the hawks are diving in for a quick bat snack. And so if you're a bat and you're flying out of this cave, your best strategy is to stay in the middle. And that's why these tube-like, undulating wave of bats come out of the cave, because the smart bats don't want to be on top. You're all trying to fly out with the rest of your friends, but not be where the hawks are getting you. Okay, so around the world, we're only beginning to quantify the dollar value of the ecosystem services provided by bats in the insects they eat, but it's very high. One thing that is often said is that bats are terrific to have around because they eat mosquitoes. That is true, but imagine you are a very hungry bat and you want a meal, and you could eat a moth, a big fat juicy moth, or you could eat a mosquito. Which one are you going to go after? I'm going to go after the moth. So bats are good for mosquitoes, but you're probably better off with a lot of dragonflies for your mosquitoes than having bats. But bats do provide these important ecosystem services, and we still in our literature do mention this because they do eat mosquitoes. It's just they're not a major predator on mosquito populations. They're also, this is again going back to the fruit-eating bats, the Megachiroptera. Here we have Peter's dwarf epauletted fruit bat, and this is from West Africa. And this guy does something very important. He eats this food, and here is the Gambian epauletted fruit bat, and he's eating that food, and they're flying off. And bats do something that birds generally don't do, which is they like to and they prefer to defecate in flight. It's because when they land, they're upside down. Defecating doesn't work so well when you're upside down. You want to defecate when you're flying. It's a little bit more hygienic. So when these bats are flying around, defecating what they've eaten a lot of seeds. And when we look at reforestation plots, and the studies that have been done of reforestation in the tropics show that bats are the most effective seed dispersers. We have little competitions with the birders. That the bats are much more effective dispersers than the birds. Do disperse seeds, but not as effectively as the bats. This is just one sort of before and after. This is a South American clearing. I think this is in Brazil. I'm not positive. I got these pictures from BC, from Bat Conservation International. And this is the same plot 3 years later. And pretty much every plant you're seeing here was dispersed by a bat. Bats are also important pollinators. Here's I'll just go through a number of pictures of bats pollen. This is the so cute picture. This is the pretty cool picture. And this picture is an amazing picture. This is Epimorphus wahlbergi. This is Wahlberg's epauletted fruit bat. And it is going up to pollinate this flower. And this flower you may not recognize, but the tree is one you probably will recognize. This is the flower that only comes out at night of the baobab tree. And so this bat is a very effective pollinator of baobabs. All right, so that's sort of the background. Let me pause here. Colleen, how am I doing time-wise?
It's 7:35.
7:35. So 5-10 more minutes. Is that okay?
Yep, that'd be great.
So I'll go through this. I'll go through this pretty quick. So that's kind of the fun part, and now we go to the depressing part. And I'll speed through it pretty quickly. I promise. And it's not all depressing. I promise that too. So how are bats doing? According to the IUCN Red List, which is sort of the global list of endangered species, and they've got these different categories, everything from not evaluated all the way to extinct in the wild and extinct. And here I'm putting the numbers that we have of the 1,400 species of bats. Of those not evaluated, 60 are data deficient, 209 are near threatened, 173 are vulnerable, 37 are endangered, 29 are critically endangered, and 12 are, that we know of, are extinct in modern times. So what are the threats to bats? Well, with 1,400 species, the answer is that it depends. Habitat loss and degradation, that's the number one thing. And I'm not even gonna just go there because that is just that for like most biodiversity in most places, that is the number one cause of biodiversity loss. But a little bit on overexploitation. Bats are hunted and eaten, and if you've been following the late news as of around January, we talk a lot about bats in markets, and I'll say more about this in a moment. It's a big factor for certain number of species, but not a big factor worldwide. Disease, especially in North America, is a huge factor. And right now, bats are being decimated in North America by this fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, and it's causing something called white nose syndrome. In effect, essentially what white nose syndrome does is it wakes bats up from hibernation. They get this white crust on their mouths, on their nose and their mouth, and then also gets on their wings, and it wakes them up, and they use up all their fat reserves and can't last until spring. So we're working on it. Climate change is having an effect. Here's some bats. These are bats that are dying in Australia. And this kind of mortality event in Australia, where bats are actually an urban species and people see bats all the time. If you're in Australia and you're in Sydney or you're in Melbourne, you see bats in an urban setting. And they know bats pretty well. They know these flying foxes, and they're dying now. And they didn't used to die in the way that they're doing now due to the extreme heat events in Australia. Climate change. So climate change is having an effect. Renewable energy is having an effect too. And this is, you hear this from certain people, some of them running for president, as to why we should only use petroleum products. It's an unfortunate fact that wind development is having an impact on certain species. We're working with the wind industry, we, meaning Bat Conservation International, we're working very closely with the wind energy industry to resolve these issues. And we're finding ways. It's very hard going. And sometimes we find that the wind industry is not as friendly an actor as we would like to think it is, and maybe a little more protective than we would like it to be. But we are finding solutions. It's a slow, long slog, but we're making inroads. So everyone know that. So so those are sort of the big threats that we're facing and grappling with. But I know it's hard to talk about bats these days without even touching on this critter, which is affecting all of our lives, which is indeed why I'm not up in Swampscott right now in a very nice setting with all of you in person. We're here and because of coronavirus, and we're asking what caused this? What caused COVID-19? What are the causal factors? And if you've been following the news, you know that it's been related back to bats. And so here's, if you look at SARS from about 2 decades ago, or MERS that emerged 10, 15 years ago, MERS is the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And bats seem to be the origination point for many of these spillover events, for these zoonotic diseases. And we don't know how the current coronavirus event is related. Our best estimate, and again, you've probably all read this, but our best estimate is that there is a bat, and I'll show you the species here. This is an intermediate horseshoe bat from China, Rhinolophus affinis, and there is a virus found on this bat that has about 93% overlap. It's 93 to 96, depending on how you're looking at it, percent identical to coronavirus. And so it seems like this is the closest relative that we've identified. It seems as though if this is the ultimate source, it differentiated, or it evolved, it started evolving in separate paths somewhere between 40 and 70 years ago. Why do bats seem to be the source of these viruses? We don't really know. A working hypothesis is that bats can harbor high viral loads because of their biology. Bats fly. It means they expend a huge amount of energy. They produce really high temperatures, and in involving those energy pathways, they've somehow involved in that has been an evolution of the ability to just live with these viruses. The intermediate host may be a pangolin. Here's one species. There's a number of species of pangolins, and they're found in these wet markets in China, and you've heard a lot about these wet markets. I have a difficult time sort of pointing my finger at these wet markets. Here's another picture from one of these wet markets in China, and this one was in Wuhan. There are some theories out there that it actually came out of the lab. That's a very complex issue, and we can get into that if we want to. But I like to just always point out, when China has these wet markets, here in the United States, we've got our CAFOs, our confined animal feeding operations. And so if you're going to start pointing your fingers at other cultures and other peoples and other countries, it's also important to point fingers back at yourself and understand what you're doing. And in terms of putting ourselves at risk in terms of disease, these CAFOs are high on the list. So I'm just going to end. I'm at the end. I'm going to end with number one. What's the ultimate source of the problem? It's not bats causing these terrible disease and causing us to be on Zoom right now. It is the one species known as Homo sapiens, the one primate that is causing most of the problems on this planet. So it is not the one, but this diversity, and even the rodents, I say that as a bat fan, even the rodents we want to sell, what we're here is to understand, to celebrate, and to let live and thrive and evolve all of these species. So with that, I'll say thank you and just give a quick plug for Bat Conservation International. So I'm the chair of the board of BCI, and this is our brand. This is actually the first presentation on bats that I've done with our brand new logo. So this is sort of its coming out party. So sorry, I think I went a little over. I'm sorry about that, but I'd love if anyone has any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie, on behalf of the Conservancy. Does anybody want to go first with a question? I'm happy to also read questions from the chat if you're having issues with your audio. If not, I can always find things to talk to Charlie about too.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Nancy.
I have always wanted to find a way of supporting bats here in Massachusetts on my property. I have mason bee houses. I have a yard full of milkweed. I raise monarchs. I've raised 150 and let them go this year. If anyone needs milkweed seeds, I've got 3 varieties, let me know. But how can I support bats on my property?
Well, the most popular page on our website are the resources on building bat houses. So you can build bat houses. So numerous bats, it turns out, have decided that nature is not all that great, and that human buildings are actually a lot better. And why is that? Well, bats like to spend their day, which is their night, in the perfect temperature. And so when they're out looking for a cave or for many species around here will spend the night in trees, often in sort of old trees under the bark. They'll find places to sleep, and those places are less and less and fewer and far between. And when a bat goes into a house and it gets up into the rafters and it's in your roof, the reason it likes it so much is that it can move around all day and find the perfect temperature all day, because the temperature in your roof is changing all day. So that bat is really happy because it can find its sweet spot much easier in many human buildings than it can out in its evolved habitat. So that's why we find bats all the time in houses. And I know people who are fine with having bats in their house. I'm personally not fine with having bats in my house. I'd rather not have bats in my house. So I would rather have them out because bats will eventually start, unless your walls are really good, a smell will build up after a while. So it's good to get the bats out. And you want to put them in bat houses. The problem with bat houses, so bat houses work, they require a really good placement. And you've got to get the color right so that the shading is right. The bigger, the better, so that you're replicating that idea that the bat can go somewhere where it finds that sweet spot of temperature. So if you can make a big bat house, that's a great thing. Most people can't do that, so they get the smaller bat houses, the bat houses that are about as, maybe about as big as this, and you put them on a wall. Much better to put the things that we have had a whole bat house network, and so it's a great case, Colleen, of citizen science, of people trying to figure out what makes a bat house work the best. So never put your bat house on a tree. Trees can be climbed, and raccoons are good climbers, and a nice bat snack is something a raccoon would love. Put your bat houses on the side of your house. Put them on the side put them on a pole. There's a lot of different things you can do in terms of bat houses. So the bigger, the better. Often you can build a bat house and have no bats come for 5 years, and then they'll find it. And then sometimes they abandon them. So we don't really, we're still figuring out what bats like and what they don't like. But I would highly recommend building and putting bat houses on your property.
Nancy, I did drop some links in the chat for BCI's resources as well.
Thank you, Colin.
Any maintenance involved, Charlie, with bat houses?
Say again?
Is there any maintenance involved?
You want to put them somewhere where the drop the guano. So because bats, you've all had nests in an inconvenient place somewhere, and it's pretty nasty under that nest, bird nest. Because bats are mostly defecating away, you don't get the kind of buildup under bat that you would for say a nest, but you do get a buildup. It's a slower buildup, but it's a buildup. So you want your bat box away from anywhere that the guano is going to be. If your bat box is on the side of your house and the house isn't on a well-used pathway, the rain and just sort of natural forces are going to do away with any kind of guano coming out of those bat boxes. But if you have it in a sheltered place or it's a pathway, you might not want to put the bat box there.
So can I ask? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Jack.
What can be done to protect bats from wind machines?
Good question.
So we're working on a number of things. The most hopeful strategy is stopping the turbines at certain times in the evening. So you feather them and you stop them from going. And ironically, it was thought for a while that bats were not being hit by the props, but were actually getting stuck in a vortex and getting confused and then falling to the ground and breaking a wing and not being able to fly. And it turns out that doesn't seem like it's the case. But what we find is that there's higher mortality when the blades are spinning slower, which is totally counterintuitive. But in the evening,
doesn't their echo ability enable them to tell where the blades are at any particular time? Or
those blades are moving insanely fast. It doesn't look like it, but if you're a bat, so you're a bat flying along and you're echolocating in front, and the blade comes down and gets you. And so it's just, the blade is moving fast and it's not in your echolocation path. So that's what we think is going on. So they're just, the blade is coming down on them or coming up on them if they're on the other side of the turbine. And so it's so one thing we've gotten some wind facilities to do is to tape. So usually in a typical windy place where there are windmills, the wind tapers off at around 6 p.m. You get increasing winds around 5 p.m. and then around 6 p.m. they'll die down. And so you're not getting a huge amount of power out of those windmills. So if we can just get them to stop, if the rotators if it's not rotating at all, then the bat has no problem with it. And so that's the most effective thing. But if you don't want to do that, or you're in a place where there is still wind, and sometimes the wind keeps blowing all night or all evening, we are working with sonic and visual blasters. So trying to tell the bat that this is a bad place to go, using these ultra frequencies. So no, we can't hear it. It's the same frequency as their echolocation. And we've had some promising results with that. And I've just read, actually new to me, or relatively new to me, is that we're also now trying visual sort of bright lights to see if the bright lights would scare the bats away from, you have to be really careful. Here's a great parlor trick if you don't know. If you're ever walking in the park and you happen to see bats around a lampshade, so you're out at night, you're walking the dog, and there's a lamppost, not a lampshade, there's a lamppost there, and there's a lot of bugs around the lamppost, and every once in a while you see a bat swoop in. A bat swoops in and takes out a bug, and so there's these bats circling above you, and this is pretty much anywhere you see this anywhere in North America. Take a little pebble. This is a really good parlor trick. Take the pebble and throw it up towards the lamp, and often you'll have a bat swoop out of nowhere, check out your pebble, and then fly. They won't eat the pebble. They're smart enough not to eat your pebble, but they're like, oh, big moth, nah, rock, and they'll go. So bats, they're looking out for things, and they're not blind. I forgot to say that, but I think you guys all know that bats are not blind. There's no such thing as blind as a bat. They see just as well as other mammals with the same size eyes. They don't see as well as us because the size of your eye has something to do with how good your vision is. Not everything. Think of hawks, think of eagles. They've got really good vision, even though they've got smaller eyes. So there's a lot going on there, but they're not blind. So so those are the main things that we're developing. I do know that there's some scientists who are very skeptical that the audio deterrents are not going to work. So the jury's out on that. We're really hoping it works, because if that can work, that solves a lot of problems, but we don't. So we're actually actively spending money on research on that.
Charlie, I've lived in Swampscott for 40 years. I know I'm not in the pictures. I muted my video, but I've been living here for 40 years. I don't think I've ever seen a bat.
Well, you probably that's so. So there have been a lot less bats in New England over the past since 2007. 2007, the winter of 2006, 2007 was when white nose syndrome was discovered. The first discovery of it was in a cave outside of Albany, New York. And these bat biologists went out to this cave, and they just discovered an entire cave of dead bats. And they were just terrified and horrified. And it is spread. It is now, white nose syndrome is now all the way out to Washington State. It's down in Texas, and it's hammered New England bats. It's absolutely hammered populations. I mean, if white nose gets into a colony, mortality can be up to 100%, and is usually at least 90%. I have heard, I'm not sure if I believe it, I have heard white nose syndrome called the most the most devastating wildlife disease in wildlife biology history. I'm not sure if I trust that factoid, but I've heard it described like that.
I'd like to ask if there's anything that can be done about that. But before I get to that, following up on the last question, what species of bat would we find around here, and what would be their food source? Obviously, I think I heard insects, but would they also be pollinators?
No.
No.
All of the species of bats in Massachusetts, which I believe, I should know this, I believe is 11. Colleen, do you know if that's right?
That sounds about right. I was gonna say a dozen, but that wasn't really based on fact. That was based on vague recollection of the biology.
So just if you had ever seen a bat, you've probably seen either a big brown bat, which is Aptesicus fuscus, or a little brown bat, which is Myotis lucifugus.
So I did share there's two iNaturalist observations from town, which is what I'm screen sharing. So one of them is a big brown bat, just to show some of the species that have been documented in town. So I thought people might want to see those photos.
Is that a little brown on the left?
I don't know what that one is on the left. It looks like it's stuck at a subfamily designation.
Yeah. Hard to tell, but yeah. So I mean, little browns used to be the most common bat in North America, and now they're endangered. That is how bad this white nose syndrome is. I mean, it is just awful. So today in the evenings, when you and the good news is that bats populations in New England are slowly recovering. We are slowly getting our bats back. I'm a big bat fan. I spent the lockdown up in New Hampshire, where my wife, grew up in a lake house, and we've sort of been up there in this lake house, and I see bats every summer. I did not see one bat all summer. Now that's partly because I wasn't out every night with. I do have if you want to go searching for bats, there's a very cool thing that you can stick into your iPhone that's an ultrasonic bat detector, and then you can go around and look for bats. And I didn't have an opportunity to do a lot of that this summer. I don't know why, but I did not. I go out in the evenings and I look around. I didn't see any bats. I don't know if that's just there. Hey, there it is. The wildlife acoustics. That's it. That's it. Take it out of the package so we can see it. So yeah. So that goes right into the iPhone. And then there's a software package from Wildlife Acoustics that will translate the sound, the ultrasonic frequency into the species. It will identify the species for you. Now, my biologist friends say that the identification is so, but there's only 11 species in New England, so it's pretty good for New England. When you get down to Texas, it's probably not so good, but around here, it's a very cool device. It's a lot of fun to play with. Thank you for showing that.
So,
is there?
I live in Salem. Can I find some of these bats over the Halloween season here? What do you think?
Well, so less and less, because there's less and less food, and so some bats are migratory, and for bats, the phenomenon of migration gets a little complex because it's hard to define. Are they just sort of switching homes, or are they migrating? Like, well, are they doing a point A to point B seasonal change, or are they just shifting houses? And when do they go into hibernation? There are still insects out there. I know there's still insects out there. I left my door open the other night, and we had moths galore in our house. So there's still food for the bats to eat, even now in mid to late October. That will change soon, and then there'll bats. All the 11 species, if I've got the number 11 right, are insectivorous. They're all eating insects.
So they either go into hibernation or they go south?
I believe that they will often migrate. Interestingly enough, they'll often migrate northward. They're migrating not towards, it's a bit far for them to fly all the way to a warm locale. They're going to fly to a place where it's really nice to hibernate. So sometimes their feeding and breeding grounds during the summer are south of where their hibernation roosts are. So you get very and it will differ. It'll be different for different colonies, different groups within the same species. So it's a little. It's not like the seasonal bird migration. It's very eclectic, and you don't know exactly when or where they're going to be going in. But when they do go into hibernation, they truly hibernate. Their systems go down. Their heartbeat goes down. They shut down their organs. It's a much more thorough hibernation than, say, bears. A bear goes into a cave or a burrow, and its internal temperature actually does not go down. A bear's internal temperature stays steady. Their heartbeat goes down. Some of their organs do shut down, but their internal temperature is the same. A bat's internal temperature goes down. So when white-nosed fungus wakes it up during the middle of winter, it just to come out of torpor just takes a huge amount of energy, and that's why they just don't survive the winter.
Is there any remedies that are being experimented?
We're trying everything. We're trying a spray. We're actually going into some caves. So this is all experimental right now, but we're actually seeing if we can spray caves, because we do have some chemicals that will kill Pseudogymnascus destructions, which is good. But then, as we all know, pesticides or fungicides, there's problems with fungicides, and what are the side effects? So we want to be really careful before we do anything too precipitous, but we're trying it. We also are trying, we've got some vaccines in development, capturing an entire colony of bats and vaccinating all those bats. That's like awfully hard to do. That's a big job. And so those are the kind of things that we're doing. For a large degree, we believe that this fungus is just running its course, and what we are hoping for is to make sure that the bats that have survived are going to be able to come back with some kind of evolutionary response to white nose syndrome, and that we'll build populations up. There's a lot of interesting theories. If you go to Europe is full of bats. There's lots of bats in Europe. Overall, their population numbers are much lower than they are in North America. And it's actually been a question of biology. Why are there similar bats in Northern Europe or throughout Europe? Same sort of diversity of pattern across Europe as you have across North America. Why is there a lower population? It is hypothesized that white nose syndrome hundreds of years ago actually came into Europe and hammered European bat species, and that the populations that we see of bat species now in Europe is the resurgent population from being hammered. We say that white nose syndrome came from Europe. It did come from Europe, but maybe it didn't originate in Europe. Maybe Europe actually, it was invaded Europe from somewhere else at some point.
Do most bats hibernate?
No. I think if you did the 1,400 species, the temperate bats are hibernating, but most of the diversity of bat species are in the tropics, and they don't hibernate. So the vast majority of bat, North America, all of Canada and the United States, and again, I may not have this number exactly right, have about, the number 47 is coming up in my mind. So I think 47 species in the United States and Canada, and in Mexico, it's over 100.
Oh.
So the diversity just balloons out as you go south.
So Charlie, I did look up the state of Massachusetts. We have 9 species of bats.
9 species. So less than 11. Yeah. So is 11 New England, maybe?
I didn't get that far in my Google.
Hopefully that 11 was some residual brain cell that was somewhat accurate.
Awesome. Any final questions before we close for the evening? If not, I will once again extend thanks to Charlie for joining us and for sharing information.
I have one final question.
Oh, go for it, Ellie.
If bats are mammals, do they nurse their babies? I mean, you would think so, but I can't imagine nipples on a bat.
They got him. They got him now. But you bring up something that's really fascinating, and that every mother can sympathize with. Mother bats, for many species, will leave their baby behind, but often they have to fly with the baby. And many species of bats fly with a baby that is the weight equivalent of a human mother walking around holding their teenager.
Oh my
So a
God.
teenage child. The babies grow very fast, but they don't. It takes them a while to develop. So if you want to have sympathy for a mammalian mother, have it for bats, because they've got these mother bats are carrying around. Another amazing fact about Desmodus rotundus, the vampire bat, it has been found that the mother bats will come back to a vampire bat colony, and the mother bats, if there is a mother bat who is not lactating because they couldn't find enough food that night, or something happens to that mother bat, mother vampire bats will actually feed non-relatives. It's like one of the only instances, and Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's known for being one of the only instances where in nature we find a mammal mother feeding its milk to a non-relative baby. They're that social because when bats go out, I mean the amount of lactation, amount of milk a mother produces is directly related to how much food they were able to, and because it's hard to get blood, you're either going to get to the cow or you're not going to get to the cow. So some nights you're going to be lucky, some nights you're not going to be lucky. They've evolved to be very cooperative. It's like hyper cooperative in their mothering, so they can trade back and forth.
So yeah, it's a case of what's called reciprocal altruism. So that because they live in these close quarters and they develop these tight relationships, and those communities are stable communities, they know that those favors will be paid back. And so it's a classic example of what animal behaviorists call reciprocal altruism.
How many
Colleen,
babies-
am I right that in terms of lactation, this is the only example, or am I wrong on that? Is there another?
That I don't know, but we could ask Stan. Stan, I bet you would have that fact at his fingertips.
How many babies and how often do they have litters?
One a year.
One litter or one baby?
One baby a year. And often not till, so this actually gets back to the disease, to the issue of coronavirus. So one of the reasons bats harbor so many viruses is because they've put so much of their evolutionary strategy in long-term survival. When you look at most small mammals, they don't live long. A bat, an insectivorous bat, can live a decade or longer. And so many species of bats the females don't start having babies until they're about 3 or 4 years old. I think some of them are even 5 years old. And so that's a long time to wait before you're starting to have a baby, and you're only having one a year. So they're very slow reproducers. And
you wouldn't know it from looking out at your pictures coming out of the cave.
Yeah. Well, that I don't know if I mentioned that, but that cave is not only the largest conglomeration of bats in the world, it's the largest conglomeration of mammals in the world. Nowhere else will you find 15 million of the same species in one of mammal species in one place.
And where's that cave?
Texas. And if you join Bat Conservation International and you're in San Antonio or Austin, it's not a public place to go, but if you're a member of BCI, you can actually go to Members Night, which happens several times a year, and go out to Bracken, and you can actually go watch Bracken Cave. It's really one of the most remarkable sites in the world. So I highly encourage it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Charlie. On behalf of
Thank
the
you.
Conservancy, we are very grateful for you spending the evening with us.
Well, this is a lot of fun. Thank you for listening to me for so long, and thank you for all your great questions. I really appreciate it. It's really been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.